Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to go through another episode of my non-new release recommendations. This time we're going to focus on all things spooky. For those of you who might be looking for non-new release recommendations that are not spooky, I will have a playlist linked below of all of my other videos that have non-new release recommendations. This is something I like to do at least once a month to give you guys a little bit of a reprieve from all of the new shiny baubles and a little bit of a reminder about some past books that have also been very dear to my heart. All of the recommendations that you are going to receive in this video were published before the year of 2023. That way you don't necessarily have to fight the masses for the attention of these books, and I hope you find something you love. These are not all horror recommendations. I have mixed in some dark fantasy as well as some middle grade for those of you who don't necessarily want to read horror in spooky season. I also have an honorable mentions list that I'm going to say before I give you guys my 5 recommendations. I always do 5 recommendations in these videos, but this one was really hard for me to narrow it down. So I do have 4 books that I think you probably already know about, but I just want to mention them, and I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to rapid fire them at you, but I just want to put them in your brain if you haven't read these yet, because I do think that they are worth a read in spooky season. So my rapid fire recommendations, my honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. The first one is Catherine House, which I recommend if you like dark academia, eerie atmosphere vibes. The second one is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I'm sure all of you have heard. If you like classics, but you also like haunted house stories, I absolutely love this book. If you're looking for something a little lighter during spooky season, but still with the fall vibes, I would recommend Small Spaces by Katherine. It's a middle grade series. It's really cute. And lastly, in my honorable mentions, I have Gideon the Ninth, which is a darker fantasy featuring necromancers and a competition component. On to the 5 recommendations that I have for you guys. The first one I haven't heard anyone talk about since its release date, and that is The Helm of Midnight, which was published in 2021. It is a part of a trilogy. I'm not sure if all 3 books are out yet or if just the first 2 have been published. I haven't looked in a minute. But, and I have to preface this with saying that I ended up DNFing the second book in the series because I didn't like where the series was headed, but I think the first book was really fun, and you might like where the actual series goes. I just really liked the intrigue and the mystery in the first one, and I don't think that continued on into the second book. So if you haven't ever heard of The Helm of Midnight, this is a dark fantasy series about a whole bunch of killings that are going on. You have dual timelines that you're following. You're in a fantastical world where people's abilities, people's magics, and people's personalities can be imbued into masks. And so they have handed down a whole bunch of knowledge from people from year to year by these masks. You have people who are masters of martial arts. You have people who are amazing at surgeries, and they have all this medical knowledge, and that can be imbued into they're called death masks because you do it whenever a person dies. They have these detectives who in the past have been able to solve any murder, and they make masks out of these detectives. I don't know exactly what they're making it out of. To me, it seems like a soul connection with the mask, but it's been a minute since I've read it, so I don't know that that's exactly accurate. Anyway, there's a mask in this book that was imbued with the mind of a serial killer, a really infamous serial killer who I believe killed 10 people and terrorized this city however many years ago. And the mask ends up going missing, and there starts being murders again. And so you have to follow the guards of this city to try and figure out what happened to the mask. You also get to follow the past timeline and the person, the serial killer that the mask was imbued from. And so the intrigue of the serial killer is very fun to follow, but I think this is one of those series and one of the mysteries that at the end of this book, that mystery, the serial killer mystery, is wrapped up. And then you continue on with the rest of this realm, and I just wasn't as intrigued with that as I was with the serial killer. But I still recommend it because I had a lot of fun with the first series, and like I said, the second book might work for you. The second recommendation that I have for you guys was actually my first little tiptoe into horror, and also my first book of T. Kingfisher. So it got me on my T. Kingfisher craze, and that is The Hollow Places. This was published in 2020, and it's about a woman who is down on her luck. I believe she's just gotten divorced. I think maybe she lost her job there's something going on where she ends up having to go back home. And she goes back home where her uncle owns a taxidermy shop. It's kind of like, it's a museum of weird things or weird curiosities, and he has a lot of taxidermied animals within there. So creepy vibes right off the bat. He's kind of eccentric. He ends up having to have surgery, and so she has to take over his shop. And within this shop, she finds a hole in the wall that shouldn't be there and doesn't really make sense. And she and another character in the book end up going to explore this place, which is the Hollow Place. And I think that's all I'm going to say. It's really creepy. The Hollow Place is not a place I would ever want to be. But this book, I think one of the reasons that I really gravitated towards this, first off, I did not realize that this was horror going into it. I didn't read anything. I just was recommended it by a friend, and I picked it up without knowing what it was. But even though it is horror, and at the time I wasn't reading a lot of horror, I think that there is a lot of moments of light throughout, because T. Kingfisher's banter between the two characters is absolutely phenomenal. And so you get that like comic relief throughout these really tense moments in the book. The next recommendation I have for you is Sundial by Catriona Ward. And this was my first experience with Catriona Ward. This book left me questioning everything. You follow a mother and a daughter in this, really a family at the beginning, but you only have the 2 POVs. I think there might be another POV somewhere in the book, but the main storyline is told by the mother and the daughter's POVs. And the mother just wants a normal life, has 2 kids, lives in a suburb, but some weird things start happening with her oldest daughter. She talks to bones. She is intrigued by kind of the oddities in life, the kind of dark things. And so the mother starts thinking that her oldest daughter might have inherited some habits from her family. You have no idea what that means. And so she decides to take her oldest daughter out to a family location called Sundial in the middle of the desert to figure out what is wrong with her daughter. And her daughter is a little concerned as to why she has to go by herself. There's some odd things with her mother. She doesn't quite know what's happening. And you get to figure out the past that the mother has and her family, and why these dark things that she sees in her daughter could potentially be dangerous. It's a wild ride. I'm not saying you will get answers. You will get theories, and there is a Reddit community that goes through some of them, but it was a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend it for spooky season. Next is one I almost put on my honorable mentions, because I know I talk about this book a lot, but I can't, I can't not, and that is Night Film by Marisha Pessl, I think is how you pronounce her name. And oh my gosh, I freaking love this book. This was published in 2013, and I just read it this year. But it has all forms of mixed media throughout that I love. You have like these journal entries and newspaper clippings. You have this like darknet blogs and things throughout. What you are doing in this book is you are following our main character. I can't remember his name, but he's an investigative journalist, and he has in the past investigated a horror director, because this person's a little hidden from society. He's definitely secretive. He has an occult following, and his name is Cordova. Sorry, I got there eventually. So Cordova has a cult following with his horror novel or his horror films, and so much so that the regular movie theaters will not play them anymore. It's been like blacklisted, and the only time you can see his films is if you find these like black market venues that will show them. And so there's some darkness going on there. Well, Cordova's daughter dies at the very beginning of this novel, and it's deemed a suicide, but there are some things that point to it perhaps not being a suicide. So our investigative journalist investigates, goes on the dark web, tries to figure out what's going on with Cordova's community and whether or not this infamous horror director had something to do with his daughter's death. It is absolutely fantastic. This is another one where the ending, I think you will either love or hate, but Man, I love this book. It was absolutely fantastic. My last recommendation for you is probably my favorite on this list. It was really hard to pick a favorite between, especially the last two. And I have recommended this in the past, but I still don't see a lot of people talking about it. And it is one that was published in 2020. And that is You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. I love this cover. So this is a dark fantasy. I guess I should say that about... so Night Film is horror mystery thriller, and then Sundial is horror, just so you guys are aware. I would say that You Let Me In is dark fantasy. It does have horror elements, so it's not necessarily something that's light by any means, but you follow an author who has gone missing and been declared dead because she's been missing for so long. I think she's been missing for 7 years. And her niece and nephew are pulled into a lawyer's office, and the lawyer tells them, you've inherited your aunt's estate. However, in order to inherit, you have to go out to her isolated cabin in the woods and read her last manuscript. And she has written her autobiography, essentially, and it describes why certain events in her life happened in a fantastical way. And throughout this entire book, you are trying to figure out whether or not she is telling the truth or if she's a little crazy. And I think this book does an excellent job of pulling the reader in both directions. I don't think there's a clear-cut path that you follow as you're reading the events that the niece and nephew are reading through, whether or not the reason these dark things happened in this woman's past were because of decisions that she made or things that she was forced to do by magical beings. I absolutely love this book. It is very dark, definitely read trigger warnings, but yes, I think you should give this one a try, especially if you like unreliable narrators. So those are my 5 non-new release recommendations for spooky season, along with a sprinkling of some honorable mentions. I hope you found something that you are interested in. If you have a book that you have absolutely loved in the past spooky seasons that you maybe return to every year, or just one that you want to recommend, leave them in the comments down below. I would love to see your recommendations and add to my list for this spooky season or next. And if you aren't feeling like chatting today, leave a little bird in the comments for You Let Me In, so I know that you're here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!